Introduction. In the Islamic political system, obedience to Allah Almighty is the ultimate guiding principle that governs the behavior of both the ruler and the ruled. However, there are limits to this obedience, and this essay will explore these limits and their implications for the relationship between the government and the citizens. Limits of obedience to Allah Almighty. While obedience to Allah Almighty is a fundamental principle in the Islamic political system, there are limits to this obedience. These limits are based on the idea that no one has the right to demand obedience in matters that are contrary to the teachings of Islam. Therefore, if a ruler or a government requires citizens to disobey Allah Almighty, then it is not permissible to obey such a command. Implications for the relationship between the government and the citizens. The limits of obedience to Allah Almighty have significant implications for the relationship between the government and the citizens in the Islamic political system. The government is responsible for ensuring that its laws and policies are consistent with the principles of Islam, and it must not demand obedience in matters that are contrary to Islamic teachings. In turn, the citizens have a duty to obey the government as long as its laws and policies are in line with the principles of Islam. However, if the government requires them to disobey Allah Almighty, then they have a duty to resist such commands. Application of the limits of obedience to Allah Almighty. The limits of obedience to Allah Almighty have practical applications in the Islamic political system. For example, if a government enacts laws or policies that are in conflict with Islamic principles, the citizens have the right to peacefully protest and demand changes. In extreme cases where the government's actions are completely against Islamic teachings, citizens may even have the right to remove the government through peaceful means. Conclusion. In conclusion, obedience to Allah Almighty is the ultimate guiding principle in the Islamic political system. However, there are limits to this obedience, and citizens have a duty to resist any government actions that are contrary to the teachings of Islam. These limits have important implications for the relationship between the government and the citizens, and they ensure that the government is held accountable for its actions and policies. Overall, the limits of obedience to Allah Almighty are an essential component of the Islamic political system, and they promote justice, equality, and the well-being of all members of society.